Hey, so here's the thing I want to tell you about Michelle. She's 32, runs her own digital marketing agency, and yeah, she built it from the ground up. All those late nights, small wins, and tons of hustle. But here's the twist. Her story isn't just about business success. It's about family, betrayal, and proving people wrong when they've counted you out. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's crazy to see how far these stories travel. Growing up, Michelle's childhood felt like a constant comparison she could never win. On one side, there was Ethan, her older brother, and honestly, he seemed to glow with this effortless charm and brilliance. The kind of kid who aced every test, captained the debate team, and played piano just enough to impress the adults at family gatherings. To her parents, he was perfect, a tangible proof that they were good parents. Geniuses even, and their pride wrapped around him like this warm, almost suffocating blanket. And then there was Michelle. She was, well, different. Not bad, not failing in the usual sense. But she didn't move through the world in those straight, clean lines her parents admired. While Ethan memorized the periodic table or dissected frogs in biology class, Michelle's notebooks were filled with sketches, doodles, and ideas for logos she imagined someday turning into something real. She noticed patterns where no one else did, connected ideas that seemed unrelated, and she loved dissecting advertisements and campaigns on TV, trying to figure out what made them tick. It was her own way of thinking, creative and messy, and it wasn't appreciated at home, in her parents' eyes. Her mind zigzagged when it should have marched in a straight line. "You can't make a living doodling, Michelle," her father would say, not angry, just weary, as if her creativity was a mild inconvenience he had to endure. Her mother would quietly push a math textbook in her direction, sighing softly as if to say, "Here, maybe this will help you be normal." The pressure was relentless. Michelle was constantly told to follow the path laid out for Ethan: prestigious degrees, a clear career trajectory, and the steady approval of their social circle. Every choice she made, every stumble she took, was measured against Ethan's flawless record. She was trying to run a race that she wasn't built for, one her parents didn't understand and, frankly, didn't seem to want to. And with each misstep, the subtle, quiet disappointment grew, like a shadow stretching across her life. What made it worse was Ethan himself, though he was mostly unaware. He played the part of the perfect older brother in front of the family. He'd offered to help with homework, and usually it meant doing the work himself and then explaining it to her, like she was dense. It was never actually lifting her up. It was just reinforcing the narrative he was the star, and she was, well, a supporting character in someone else's story. Looking back, Michelle could see it clearly now, but as a kid, it felt like a constant, low-grade ache, like trying to exist in a world where your accomplishments were never quite bright enough. The family home itself felt divided. On one side, the golden light bathed Ethan, highlighting everything he did right, every achievement meticulously noted and celebrated. On the other side, Michelle existed in shadows, trying to catch a glimpse of that light, hoping some of it would spill over by accident. Her successes, modest as they were, barely registered. "That's nice, dear," her parents would say when she mentioned a small win. immediately moving on to Ethan's latest triumph. Love wasn't absent, it was just unevenly distributed, focused on the version of success they could admire without question. School was another battlefield. Michelle was pushed into advanced classes in math and science, areas she struggled to keep up with, simply because her parents believed she should mirror Ethan's path. Every report card became a comparison, every grade a judgment. "Why can't you apply yourself like Ethan?" they would ask, over and over, like a broken record. She began to feel like a faulty replica, an imperfect version of something that was already perfect. And it was exhausting. The pressure to perform in a mold that didn't fit her was immense. She felt the weight of their expectations pressing down, and every stumble deepened her sense of inadequacy. It wasn't that she didn't try, it was that she was trying in the wrong direction for the life she wanted, and her parents couldn't see it. Even at home, their attention was carefully allocated. Every family conversation seemed to orbit around Ethan, his achievements, his future. Michelle's accomplishments were secondary, almost invisible, and she internalized it, quietly carrying the feeling that she was somehow failing, not in the objective sense, but in the one that mattered to her family's eyes. There were moments of fleeting comfort, usually when she could escape into her own world, doodling or sketching, exploring ideas that fascinated her, or dissecting the commercials and marketing she loved. But those moments were always tempered by the subtle reminder that she was different, that her interests weren't valued, and that any success she might claim was faint in comparison to Ethan's blinding brilliance. Social gatherings, family events, even holidays were a constant stage for these dynamics. While Ethan was praised and adored, Michelle was a footnote, a reminder of the narrative that needed a contrast, the shadow to the light, the so-called failure that made Ethan shine brighter by comparison. And as she grew, Michelle began to realize the implications of all this. She wasn't just overlooked. She was being shaped, subtly but surely, into the story her parents and family expected her to inhabit. She was learning that the world might be willing to see her only in terms of the narrative they had written. The talented, successful golden child and the overlooked, underappreciated daughter. It's not like they were actively cruel. There wasn't a moment of overt malice, but the bias was baked into every interaction, every expectation, every quiet sigh and casual comparison. And that bias taught Michelle something she couldn't ignore, that the life she wanted might never had that fit into their version of reality. There was a growing tension inside her, a mix of frustration, self-doubt, and curiosity about what else she might become if she could step outside that shadow. Even as a child, she felt the first stirrings of defiance, the first glimmers of a mind that wanted to explore, create, and define her own path, away from the constant glare of family judgment. She didn't know it yet, but these early experiences, the overshadowing, the subtle neglect, the pressure to conform, and the quiet but persistent bias were shaping her resilience, her creativity, and the drive that would one day fuel her escape from that narrow, suffocating definition of success. And as much as she struggled, she also learned to notice the sparks that mattered to her, the small victories that were hers alone, and to treasure them, because those sparks would later become the fire that lit her way out of the shadows and into the life she would eventually build for herself. Michelle's college experience in pre-med was, well, brutal in a way that only feels personal when it's supposed to be your life. She had enrolled because that was the path everyone expected, the straight, narrow, golden child blueprint that had worked so perfectly for Ethan. But the lectures felt like they were in a foreign language. The labs filled her with this anxious dread, and every day was a reminder that her heart wasn't in it. She spent endless hours cramming information that she didn't care about, chasing a future that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Yet, she tried, because leaving wasn't just about quitting classes. It felt like defying her entire family, and the people whose approval had always been her compass. And then there was Professor Evans, one elective business class. That was a light in all the darkness. Evans wasn't just a teacher, he actually saw her. He noticed the way she could analyze case studies and propose marketing ideas that were genuinely innovative. He saw her creative spark, her unique instincts, her ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. For the first time, Michelle felt seen not as a failed version of her brother, but as someone with her own potential. It was a rare moment of validation that gave her courage, even if just a little. But then came that night after a chemistry midterm she had studied for endlessly and still bombed. She was exhausted, demoralized, shaking, and at her breaking point. She called her parents, voice trembling, to tell them she couldn't do it anymore. She wanted to switch to business, something that made her feel alive, something she could actually be passionate about. And then came the silence, cold, heavy, crushing. When her father finally spoke, the disappointment in his voice felt almost like a physical weight. "You're throwing your life away, Michelle," he said. "Don't come crying to us when this art project of yours fails." Her mother just cried quietly in the background. It wasn't just sadness, it was a condemnation of her choice, a reinforcement that she had failed according to their standard. And then Ethan called. Of course he called. But instead of support, there was only judgment and condescension. "You're really going to embarrass them like this," he said. "I'm building a career to make them proud, and you're dropping out to draw pictures. Do you even realize how selfish that is?" To Ethan, it wasn't just a decision. Dropping out was a betrayal, an act meant to shame the family. And in that moment, Michelle realized the truth. He didn't see her as a sister. He saw her as a supporting character in his story, someone who existed only to highlight his success. And she had gone off script. That was the breaking point. The family portrait, already slightly off balance, shattered completely. Michelle wasn't just the daughter who took a different path. She became the official family cautionary tale, the one to point to when anyone asked about the contrast between the golden child and the, well, other one. The emotional weight of that realization was immense. She felt fear, shame, despair, and yet, beneath all that, a flicker of something new resolve. She understood that continuing in pre-med would mean living someone else's story. A story dictated by her parents' narrow definition of success. Leaving was terrifying, yes, but it was also liberating. For the first time, Michelle felt control over her life. She was finally running her own race, one that scared her and thrilled her all at once. And even as the family fallout hit disappointment, tears, judgment, and condescension, she felt a clarity she had never known. This was her life, her choice, her path. It was messy, uncertain, and completely hers. And that messy, uncertain first step toward business and independence would define the woman she was becoming. A woman who would one day prove, not just to her family, but to herself, that her story didn't need permission to exist. After leaving pre-med behind, Michelle found herself in a tiny, run-down apartment just off campus. It wasn't glamorous by any means. The paint was chipped, the floors creaked, and the fridge hummed like it was holding secrets. But it was hers. For the first time, she had a space that belonged only to her, a place where she could breathe and start building something that felt like her own life. Of course, the freedom came at a price. She had to work multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. Mornings were for attending her business courses at the community college. Afternoons were spent at a data entry job in a cramped office where the fluorescent lights never seemed to turn off. And evenings were a blur of trays, dishes, and impatient customers at the local diner where she waited tables. Her feet ached constantly. Her mind was often foggy from exhaustion, and some nights she'd collapse into bed and just stare at the ceiling, wondering if she'd made a huge mistake. But underneath all that tiredness, there was something different, something exhilarating. For the first time, Michelle was working towards something that was truly hers. Every business lecture she attended, every marketing concept she dissected, felt like fuel. She was finally allowed to pursue her own curiosity, her own passion. And as grueling as it was, she started to notice little sparks of satisfaction. Like the day she got an unexpected compliment from her boss at the data entry office for handling a tricky project efficiently. Or when she aced a marketing exam, the kind where she had genuinely applied herself. Not just memorized formulas, those small victories mattered more than she could have imagined. They weren't big, they weren't flashy, but they felt like proof that she could actually do this, that she could carve out a life on her own terms. Her parents' support had vanished overnight. Phone calls became infrequent, strained affairs. When her mother did answer, her voice was filled with a kind of resigned sadness, a tone that suggested she expected Michelle to be falling apart. 10 minutes of inquiries about how Michelle was doing would be immediately followed by gushes about Ethan's latest accomplishments, his perfect grades, awards, residencies, the fancy opportunities. Every word, while seemingly innocuous, was like a subtle reminder of where Michelle wasn't, the pedestal Ethan occupied, and the distance she had from it. Her father was even more distant, offering brief hellos with flat, uninterested tones, never asking about her classes, jobs, or dreams. It was clear they were washing their hands of her, leaving her to navigate everything alone. But she wasn't entirely alone. Chloe, her best friend and fellow design enthusiast, became her rock. They'd met in a class on design and quickly realized they thought alike sometimes. Too alike. Chloe understood Michelle's ambitions and saw the potential that her family refused to acknowledge. Late nights were spent together sketching out ideas for projects, laughing about the absurdity of their own exhaustion, and dreaming aloud about the future agency they wanted to start. Chloe's belief in her was a lifeline. She'd often say, "One day, they're going to see, and they're going to be so sorry." And for the first time, Michelle felt like someone truly had her back. The routine was grueling, but it was hers. Michelle started to feel alive in a way she hadn't before. Every task, whether it was delivering spreadsheets, serving coffee, or drafting a business strategy, was a building block toward her independence. The exhaustion didn't just weigh her down, it grounded her, made each little win feel earned. And slowly, very slowly, she began to see herself differently. She wasn't just a college dropout or a disappointment in her family's eyes. She was capable. She had ideas, skills, determination, and the resilience to keep moving forward even when the world, or at least the people she loved most, didn't seem to notice. There were moments of doubt, sure. Sometimes when she looked around her cramped apartment or counted the hours she was putting into work just to keep afloat, she wondered if it was worth it. But those were tempered by glimpses of possibility, an inspired marketing project, a client's nod of approval, a brainstorming session with Chloe that felt electric. It was in these small flashes that Michelle realized something profound for the first time. She was not just surviving, she was creating. She was discovering that independence was messy, exhausting, sometimes lonely, but deeply rewarding. And every little victory, the paycheck that covered her rent, the compliments on a presentation, the late-night ideas that she knew could turn into something big was a spark, a signal that she was on the right path. She was no longer living under someone else's expectations. She was defining her own, one grueling, exhilarating, exhausting step at a time. It was chaotic, it was imperfect, and it was hers. And that realization, even amidst the pain and the fatigue, made Michelle feel more alive than she had ever felt before. Michelle thought she had endured enough family judgment during her early years and college struggles, but she had no idea what was coming next. It started subtly, through small, almost casual mentions from acquaintances and clients. One day, she was meeting a potential client at a coffee shop, a woman who ran a chain of boutique fitness studios. They were having this really positive conversation, and Michelle was feeling confident, walking through her portfolio, talking about the strategies she could implement for the business. And then, almost casually, the client looked at her and said, "Your last name is familiar. Are you related to Dr.?" Michelle felt this weird knot in her stomach. "Yes," she said cautiously. "He's my brother." The woman's expression shifted instantly to one of sympathy. "Oh, wow. It's really great to see you doing well for yourself. Vanessa is a member at our downtown studio. She and your brother talk about you sometimes." Her blood ran cold. She smiled weakly and asked casually, "Really? What do they say?" And then came the carefully chosen words, the subtle framing that hit harder than any outright insult. "They just mentioned that you had a tough time after leaving college, that you've been working service jobs for years and have had some trouble finding your footing. They always say they hope you find some stability soon. It's wonderful you're starting this new venture. Good for you for pulling yourself up, pulling herself up." The words slammed into her like a physical blow. Every late night, every exhausted shift at work, every class she had aced, every client she had impressed. None of it mattered to them. Her own brother and his wife were actively painting her as a perpetual failure, a charity case, a cautionary tale. Michelle felt a wave of anger and humiliation wash over her. This mixture of disbelief and fury that someone she trusted, someone from her own family, could deliberately twist reality to make her look small. She went home that day, storming into her apartment, Chloe was there, and Michelle could barely get the words out. As soon as Chloe saw her face, she knew something was wrong. Michelle told her everything: the conversation at the coffee shop, the subtle lies, the framing of her life as if it were a struggle she hadn't overcome. Chloe's face hardened, and she said, simply, "That's it. That is just evil. Michelle, they're not just ignoring your success. They're trying to actively sabotage your reputation." And Chloe was right. It wasn't about disappointment anymore. It wasn't just about resentment. It was malicious. They needed her to be the loser in their story, the shadow in their family portrait, because it made their own successes shine brighter. That realization lit a fire in Michelle she hadn't felt before. Anger turned into determination. Humiliation transformed into resolve. She understood now that she couldn't rely on anyone in her family to see the truth. She couldn't wait for them to acknowledge her hard work, her perseverance, her real achievements. She had to ensure that her story would be told on her own terms, that the truth of her capabilities wouldn't be obscured by their carefully constructed lies. And in that moment, Michelle's purpose shifted. Her drive wasn't just to survive or to succeed for herself anymore. It was to dismantle the narrative her brother and his wife had meticulously crafted. Every strategy, every business move, every late night spent refining her skills became a tool in her arsenal. Not for revenge, exactly, but to make undeniable her worth, her competence, and her independence. It was a cold, clear clarity that struck her harder than any criticism ever could. She wouldn't let them define her. They had spent years trying, and she would spend the next decade proving that their version of her story was not only false, but absurd. This was the point where anger and strategy converged. The injustice of their lies became fuel, transforming every spark of frustration into action. Michelle realized the fight wasn't just for her future, it was for her present, and more poignantly, for reclaiming her past that they had tried to rewrite. It was a reckoning, an awakening, and she embraced it fully. In that moment, she didn't just feel alive, she felt unstoppable, ready to take the energy of betrayal and turn it into a launch pad for building her own life on her own terms, with integrity, skill, and ambition guiding the way. And from that anger, from that humiliation, her resolve was born clear, unshakable, and purposeful. She would not be a footnote in their story anymore. She was writing her own, and no one would get to edit it without her permission. Michelle's life took a new shape when she decided to fully commit to her business ambitions. Phoenix Marketing wasn't just a name, it was a personal statement. A phoenix rising from the ashes of all the doubt, judgment, and frustration she had carried for years. With Chloe by her side as the head of creative, they began building a team from scratch, fueled by raw determination, sleepless nights, and the kind of energy that only comes when you feel there's no one else to rely on. They had clients who were skeptical at first, small local businesses testing the waters, and Michelle took every project personally. Every brand she touched, every campaign she developed, became a testament to her vision and her relentless drive. She learned fast how much of business success was about seeing potential where others didn't, about connecting dots that no one else noticed. Her apartment still smelled faintly of cheap takeout and coffee. Her calendar was a battlefield of deadlines, meetings, and late-night brainstorming sessions. But she was alive in a way she had never been before. Every challenge was a chance to prove herself, not to anyone in her family, but to the person she had become. Some days, she felt like she was barely holding it together, juggling finances, client demands, and the relentless pace of building something from nothing. But then came the moments that made it all feel worth it. A client who had been struggling to find traction in social media suddenly saw engagement spike because of one of Michelle's campaigns. Another small business doubled its sales after her team redesigned their website and launched a targeted marketing push. And each time someone said, "You really know your stuff," or "I've never seen results like this," she felt a tiny spark of vindication. It wasn't about revenge, it was about acknowledgement, about the quiet validation that she had always craved but never received from her family. And yet, it was different now. She didn't need their approval. Her drive was self-fueled, her ambition directed towards something tangible, something she could build and control. Within a year, Phoenix Marketing had grown beyond the capacity of a small home office. Michelle drained her savings to lease a small office space in a trendy, up-and-coming part of the city. It was a risk, a leap of faith. But she knew she couldn't keep building in the shadows. She needed a stage, a space where the work itself could shine. Chloe became not just her partner, but a co-architect of the company's vision. Together, they set a tone for the firm that was rare, demanding but fair, innovative but grounded. They brought in talented people who could match their energy and vision, and slowly, Phoenix Marketing began to get noticed. But it wasn't easy. The first years were a blur of overwork, doubt, and the constant gnaw of fear that one mistake could unravel everything they had built. Michelle often stared at the ceiling at night, thinking of the pitying looks she had endured from her family, the whispered words of her brother and his wife that had tried to define her entire existence. Those memories, though painful, became fuel. Every setback was a chance to sharpen her strategy. Every critique a reason to improve. She learned to operate in chaos, to find order in the mess, and to lead with both heart and intellect. Their first major breakthrough came when a regional tech startup took notice of their innovative campaigns. Landing that account wasn't just about money, it was about credibility. The startup had influence, connections, and visibility. Michelle and Chloe threw themselves into the project, refining every detail, strategizing every move, and presenting work that was creative, data-driven, and impactful. Success bred success. Soon, a well-known fashion brand signed on. Recognizing Phoenix Marketing's unique approach to brand storytelling and digital strategy, the firm's reputation grew. Michelle's name, once whispered with pity in coffee shops and boutique offices, began to carry weight. She was no longer the college dropout struggling to survive. She was a CEO, a strategist, a leader who commanded respect in boardrooms and creative sessions alike. Her personal transformation mirrored the company's growth. She felt a new sense of confidence and clarity. The exhaustion and chaos of those early days had forged a resilience that became her armor. She learned to trust her instincts, to push through uncertainty, and to make decisions quickly and decisively. She also learned the subtle art of balancing vision with practicality, creativity with execution. Each client was a puzzle, each campaign a challenge, and with Chloe and their team, Michelle approached each one like a strategist, a creator, and a leader all at once. The work was relentless. But unlike the pre-med years, it was fulfilling. Every late night, every exhausted morning, every moment of doubt was now intertwined with moments of triumph. She was building something lasting, something that mattered, something that was hers. The recognition wasn't just internal. Local business journals featured Phoenix marketing, clients raved about their work, and the small agency began attracting attention from larger companies. Michelle learned to navigate the complexities of growth, from hiring and managing talent to negotiating contracts and scaling operations. The stakes kept rising, but so did her confidence. She began to see the tangible fruits of her labor: the office, the team, the clients who trusted her vision, and the growing respect from her peers. Through it all, the memory of her family's neglect and judgment lingered, but it no longer held power over her. It was a reminder, yes, but one that energized her rather than diminished her. The anger and humiliation she had felt earlier had been transmuted into determination, focus, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. Michelle's success was not only professional, it was deeply personal. Each campaign, each satisfied client, each growth milestone at Phoenix Marketing was a reaffirmation of her worth and capabilities. She'd built something real, tangible, and respected, entirely on her own terms. And in that process, she transformed herself. From a young woman shadowed by familial expectations and condescension, she became a leader, a visionary, and a creator with the authority to shape her own life and career. Every challenge she faced, every moment of doubt or exhaustion, only reinforced her conviction that she could succeed independently. Michelle had not just survived, she had thrived. Phoenix Marketing wasn't merely a business, it was the embodiment of her journey, her resilience, and her refusal to be defined by anyone else's story. And with Chloe by her side, her closest friend and collaborator, Michelle knew that this was only the beginning of a legacy she was determined to build. One client, one campaign, and one victory at a time. As Michelle's own life began to stabilize and Phoenix Marketing gained traction, she started noticing things about Ethan and Vanessa's so-called perfect life that didn't quite add up. At first, it was little whispers and hints, friends mentioning how Ethan could be arrogant, or how some nurses at his hospital found him difficult to work with. Then came the gossip about high-stakes poker nights he frequented, rumors that he'd lost substantial amounts of money in games that no one should really be losing at if they were as responsible as he appeared. Vanessa's social media, always polished, always curated, suddenly looked brittle in a different light. The charity events, the penthouse photos, the captioned luxury vacations, they all screamed perfection at first glance. But Michelle's analytical mind, the same one she used to dissect marketing campaigns, started picking up cracks. She didn't dig aggressively, she just paid attention. A casual conversation with a friend of a nurse at Ethan's hospital revealed Maury had a reputation for arrogance, for thinking he was untouchable, for making life difficult for colleagues. Later, through professional connections, she learned about Vanessa's high-pressure investment banking job, a department that had faced a scandal for risky trading and layoffs. None of it was publicly pinned to Vanessa, but the pieces were there. As Michelle connected these dots, a picture emerged that was very different from the flawless, curated narrative they presented. Their expensive lifestyle, the designer clothes, the luxury cars, the vacations might have been built on unstable ground. Debt, risky behavior, high-stakes gambling, intense work pressure, it was all there, hidden behind the image they projected. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, they had actively undermined her, painting her as the failure, while presenting themselves as these untouchable successes. But now, she realized the truth: their life wasn't perfect, and the image they had cultivated was fragile, precarious. And here's the thing, this realization didn't spark revenge, at least not in the way she had imagined as a child. It didn't matter that they had lied about her or tried to sabotage her. Instead, it shifted her perspective entirely. Michelle understood that the key wasn't exposing them, it was building something real, solid, undeniable. Her goal became stability, integrity, and sustainable success, not just personal vindication. Watching them juggle appearances and debt, trying desperately to maintain a facade, showed her the power of a foundation built on truth and hard work. Every campaign she executed, every client relationship she nurtured, every strategy she implemented now carried a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about her own business growth. It was about proving to herself that she could build a life that didn't need to be propped up with lies or hollow successes. She didn't need to tear them down. She just needed to rise. And rise she did, with her focus sharp and her ambitions grounded in reality. The knowledge of their vulnerabilities, their cracks, gave her clarity. She could finally see that while they had spent years trying to define her story, she had the power to define hers. The fragile, superficial perfection of their lives stood in stark contrast to the firm, deliberate, and ethical path she was forging. And that contrast was fuel, not for revenge, but for ambition. Michelle's curiosity about their life, initially tinged with a bit of bitterness, evolved into a lesson. She learned to pay attention, to read between the lines, to analyze the world around her critically, and in doing so, she strengthened her own approach, both in business and in life. She realized that real success isn't about appearances or short-term victories. It's about resilience, foresight, and building something that lasts, that can weather scrutiny and pressure without cracking. The stories her family had told about her, the judgment and whispers, became nothing more than background noise. Her focus was now clear: grow her business, strengthen her foundation, and create undeniable results that spoke louder than any false narrative. In a way, understanding the fragility of Ethan and Vanessa's image was liberating. It removed the power they had once held over her and replaced it with insight, strategy, and a sense of control. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was building. And in that shift, Michelle found a new kind of satisfaction, one rooted in reality, resilience, and the certainty that her life, unlike theirs, was her own to shape and sustain. The opportunity came almost out of nowhere, a chance to pitch Phoenix marketing to a major sustainable energy company. Michelle and Chloe knew this wasn't just another client. This was the kind of account that could elevate them from a respected local agency to a national presence. The pressure was immense. They spent weeks preparing, nights blending into mornings as they pored over market research, drafted presentation decks, and rehearsed their pitch until every word, every slide, every statistic felt just right. Michelle couldn't help but think back to all the moments that had led her here, the small apartment, the 2 part-time jobs, the whispered doubts from her family. That history fueled her, adding a quiet fire to every decision she made. Chloe was in her element too, sketching ideas, critiquing layouts, and pushing Michelle to think bigger, to see possibilities she might have hesitated to imagine alone. They debated endlessly over wording, over visuals, over data presentation, sometimes frustrated, sometimes laughing at the absurdity of their own obsession, but always with the shared goal of perfection. The night before the pitch, sleep was a distant memory. Michelle lay awake, mind racing through scenarios, wondering if they'd overlooked something, if a question would come up that she couldn't answer. Her heart pounded with equal parts fear and anticipation. This was the culmination of years of struggle, of building something tangible from the ashes of judgment and doubt. And then came the day. Standing in the sleek conference room of the energy company, Michelle felt the familiar twinge of nerves, but it was different now. This time, she wasn't trying to prove herself to a dismissive family. She was presenting evidence of her competence to people who could appreciate it. The pitch began, and Michelle spoke with clarity, confidence, and precision, guiding the room through their research, strategies, and innovative solutions. Chloe handled the visuals and creative flow flawlessly, complementing Michelle's energy with a dynamic, professional presence. Questions came, tough ones, curveballs designed to test them, and Michelle answered each with ease, drawing on her experience, intuition, and hard-earned knowledge. By the end, she knew, in a quiet, gut-level way, that they had nailed it. A week later, the call came they had won the account. Michelle slid down the office wall in disbelief, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming, not of sadness, but of pure, overwhelming relief. It was vindication, yes, but also validation. All those long nights, all the small victories, all the grinding effort had culminated in something undeniable. Chloe found her a few minutes later, and they opened a bottle of champagne that had been saved for a truly special occasion. They toasted quietly, smiles full of exhaustion, triumph, and disbelief. Michelle's name began to carry weight in a way it never had before. No longer the college dropout whispered about in pity. She was now the CEO of a successful, award-winning marketing agency. Industry magazines featured Phoenix marketing. Business journals discussed their innovative approach. Invitations to speak at conferences and universities began to arrive. The transformation was more than professional. It was deeply personal. Michelle felt a subtle, almost sweet satisfaction, knowing that her hard work had created results that could not be ignored, that her story now included undeniable achievements that even her family couldn't dismiss. The image of herself as a capable, innovative leader had solidified, not through validation from those who once doubted her, but through her own effort, strategy, and determination. In that moment, Michelle understood something profound. Success wasn't just about recognition or accolades. It was about proving to herself, finally, that she could rise, that her talent and resilience were real, and that the narrative of doubt and underestimation no longer defined her. The Apex Energy account wasn't just a win on paper, it was a turning point. A clear statement to the world and to herself that she had built something that mattered, something lasting, and something entirely on her own terms. It was a moment she would remember forever. A quiet victory that spoke louder than any judgment ever could. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, thick, cream-colored card with gold lettering, inviting Michelle to her parents' 40th wedding anniversary dinner at Ethan and Vanessa's penthouse. She could have refused, but honestly, that felt more like avoiding a finale than skipping a party. She prepared carefully, choosing a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that spoke of quiet confidence rather than flashy wealth. Driving to the building, she felt a strange calm. The nervous, insecure girl who used to dread family events was gone. In her place was a CEO, someone who knew her worth. The elevator ride felt almost symbolic, ascending to the scene of years of judgment, whispers, and misrepresentation. Vanessa opened the door, polished smile in place, but Michelle caught the tiniest flicker of surprise, the first crack in the flawless facade. "Michelle," Vanessa said, recovering almost instantly. "You look well." She led her to the balcony where the party was in full swing. The usual crowd of doctors, socialites, and city elites mingled with glasses of expensive wine. Michelle scanned the room, noting familiar faces and the aura of self-importance that had always made her feel like an outsider. Her parents approached, their greeting awkward, strained. "Michelle, it's good to see you," her mother said, hesitant, her hug tight but uncomfortable. Her father gave a brief nod, eyes scanning her outfit and accessories as if calculating her net worth on the spot. Then came Ethan, smug, confident, glass of scotch in hand. "Michelle," he said, a bit too loudly, "glad you could make it. We were starting to wonder if you were too busy with your little company to see your own family." The condescension, automatic and practiced over years, rolled off him, but it didn't land. Michelle simply smiled calmly. "It's a busy time," she said evenly. "Winning the Apex Energy account has been all-consuming. National campaigns are a lot of work." She saw a flicker of confusion cross his face, just as a few people nearby leaned in, curious. One surgeon, clearly hearing her mention the account, perked up. "You landed the Apex account. My God, that's huge. Phoenix marketing. Right, very impressive." The subtle shift in attention was palpable. Vanessa's smile faltered as she shot Ethan a panicked glance. Their narrative, the one they had spun about her being a perpetual failure, was unraveling in real time. Dinner was served at a long, elegant table. Michelle sat between a distant aunt and one of Ethan's colleagues. Polite conversation, but beneath it simmered tension. The real moment came after the main course. Her father stood to make a toast, beginning with a warm tribute to his marriage. Then he turned to his children. Ethan was praised lavishly, as expected. And then, almost as an afterthought, Michelle received a short, dismissive nod of acknowledgement. It was the faint praise of someone still clinging to old judgments. Ethan, emboldened by wine and his parents' partiality, decided to press further. "It's a tough world out there, isn't it?" he said, loud enough for the table to hear. "I'm just glad my stable career could help Mom and Dad out, especially now." Michelle froze for a split second, then asked calmly, almost dangerously quiet, "Help them out with what?" Ethan's smirk widened. "Oh, you didn't know Dad's little investment fund went under a few months ago. Lost a big chunk of their retirement savings. I had to co-sign a loan to keep them afloat. But don't worry, it's all taken care of." The room fell silent. He expected shame, a collapse, but Michelle didn't flinch. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye. That's interesting, because I also happen to know that you've lost over $200,000 last year at your poker games. And Vanessa, your performance bonuses have been thin since the ethics scandal in your department. Tell me, Ethan, which bank gave you a loan big enough to cover both your losses and your parents? The air shifted. Vanessa went pale. Ethan's smug confidence shattered. Michelle's calm, measured words had detonated the carefully constructed world they had built around her. Perceived failure, the whispers, the rumors, the narrative of the powerless sister, they all collapsed in a single, quiet moment. And as she watched them, the vindication was subtle but powerful, not loud, not gloating, just the satisfaction of knowing the truth, of finally seeing her family confronted with reality. Michelle had walked into years of judgment and left with the quiet proof that her story, her life, and her success were undeniable and entirely hers. The days after the anniversary dinner were quiet, almost surreal. Michelle didn't expect an apology, and she didn't get one. Instead, there was this heavy, loaded silence, the kind that hangs after a storm has passed. A week later, her mother left a frantic voicemail, crying, rambling, oscillating between anger, accusation, and pleading. She wasn't sorry for the years of neglect or siding with Ethan. She was upset about the humiliation Michelle had caused by exposing their failures. She asked, almost tentatively, if Michelle's offer to help financially was still on the table, and Michelle, for the first time in years, felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, just a quiet, steady clarity. She sent a check through her lawyer for exactly the amount her father had lost. Not a penny more, accompanied by a note stating it was a one-time, no-strings-attached gesture. The paperwork also severed any future obligation for their elder care. A preemptive strike against the assumption that the successful daughter would foot the bill. It was cold, clinical, and deliberate, the final closing of old accounts, both financial and emotional. And as she did it, Michelle felt a liberation she hadn't known before. Years of carrying the weight of her family's expectations, the judgment, the whispers, the deliberate misrepresentation, they no longer held any power over her. She had her own life, built on her terms, and it was thriving. Chloe was there, always, as a reminder of true loyalty, of friendship and partnership that didn't come with conditions or hidden judgments. Michelle reflected on what she had built: her company, her team, her supportive circle of friends, mentors, and clients. This was the family she had always needed, the network that celebrated her wins and respected her abilities. And the irony of her parents and Ethan's collapse wasn't lost on her. They had spent decades trying to define her, to control her narrative, and in the process, they had ignored the cracks in their own lives. Financial missteps, arrogance, risky decisions, all hidden beneath a polished exterior, had finally caught up with them. Michelle didn't need to gloat. The quiet satisfaction of her rise, the independence she had carved for herself, and the undeniable proof of her capabilities were enough. She realized that the revenge she had once imagined was never necessary. The truth had its own momentum. Her family's narrative could no longer overshadow her achievements. Her success was not built on anyone else's downfall, but on her resilience, her intellect, and her determination to define her own path. Michelle could finally sit back, reflect, and breathe. She had spent a lifetime trying to earn a seat at a table that had never really welcomed her. Now, she had built her own table, a table full of people she trusted, people who valued her, people who had chosen to be part of her life for real reasons. And in that realization, she found something deeper than satisfaction. She found freedom. She wasn't just independent financially or professionally. She was emotionally free, no longer weighed down by their approval or their perception. She could focus on living a life rich with purpose, creativity, and genuine connections. The lessons were subtle but profound: resilience over recognition, authenticity over approval, and building a life that could stand on its own, no matter the judgment of those who had tried to define her. Michelle's reflection was quiet, conversational in her own mind. She knew the satisfaction wasn't in revenge. It was in survival, in rising, in claiming what had always been hers, a life lived on her own terms. And the story that once made her a cautionary tale was now hers to tell, unedited and undeniable. In the end, the family that had once sought to diminish her inadvertently gave her the fuel to succeed. Their doubt, their scorn, and their selective narrative had built the fire that forged her independence. Michelle's life was full, thriving, and entirely hers. She didn't mourn the family she never had. She celebrated the life she had built, one grounded in love, respect, achievement, and the quiet but absolute satisfaction of knowing she had done it all herself. Michelle's journey is a powerful reminder that your story is yours to write. Through persistence, creativity, and sheer determination, she transformed doubt and setbacks into success and independence. It's inspiring to see how resilience and focus can turn obstacles into opportunities. If her story resonated with you, consider hitting like and subscribing. You'll get more stories about overcoming challenges, following your passions, and building a life on your own terms. Your own story is waiting to be written, and it starts with the first step.